I'd be shocked if your average film fan didn't like at least one film David Fincher has made. I mean, this guy has put out a handful of modern classics. He's carved out quite a respected reputation for himself ever since his career began in the 90s, and is one of those directors that will always draw in an audience no matter what he does. With his newest film Mank recently debuting exclusively on Netflix, I thought it would be fun to take a look at his entire filmography and rank them from weakest to strongest, at least in my opinion. Considering that prior to this project I had only seen a few of his films, this was an enjoyable experience to finally catch up with more of his work, as well as refresh myself on the films of his that I already loved. Before going any further though, I will say that his quote-unquote debut film, Alien 3, has been intentionally excluded from this ranking. After all, if Fincher's experience in making the third film in that messy franchise was so awful that he literally disowns it, then I won't disrespect him by saying anything to the contrary. So yeah, that film was not included in this ranking, but everything else is fair game. Shall we get started? Number 10. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I don't consider any movie on this list to be outright bad. All 10 of these films were made by a true craftsman, an artist who genuinely cares about the medium of short-form visual storytelling. And The Curious Case of Benjamin Button is no exception, since its lush cinematography and groundbreaking effects, for its time anyway, make this a late 2000s symbol of technological breakthroughs. But while watching it, I couldn't escape this feeling that the story lacked the drive or conflict it needed to keep me invested beyond, oh, Brad Pitt is aging backwards. Were it not for that admittedly distinctive element to the movie, this would just come off as Fincher trying to make his own Forrest Gump, even though it's based on an F. Scott Fitzgerald short story. It is just made worse by the fact that these characters are mostly aimless people who let life happen to them rather than proactively seeking their own joy, making the slow and disinteresting narrative even less engaging. As a one-time watch though, I didn't mind it, and was pleased enough by the performances and visuals to help me get through to the end. Number 9. Mank. Here we have the headline film of this particular list, the one of David Fincher's that was released to the movie-going public most recently. And I am disappointed to say that even though I admire the sheer craft on display within its 132-minute runtime, I felt that it is a story exploring very important subjects while lacking a human touch. It feels weird to say that, considering that this project must have been a very personal one for David Fincher to work on, not only due to the fact that it reflects on integral parts of film history, but more so because of the fact that his late father Jack Fincher wrote the screenplay. With the script sitting on the shelf for over 20 years, it must have been absolutely cathartic for him to film it, and for what it's worth, he and his crew managed to turn what his father wrote into an undeniably majestic vision of Hollywood's early years. For me though, the film does little emotionally or philosophically other than provide small glimpses into socio-political conversations of the era, which were undeniably interesting, but not compelling enough to carry me through the jumbled story that struggled at replicating the kind of narrative style that Citizen Kane itself had. I'm glad others found something to love from Fincher's long-awaited return to filmmaking after 6 years, and I was grateful to have finally experienced Mank, but I don't expect to rewatch it anytime soon. Number 8. The Game. There are two movies on this list that feel more like director-for-hire, Hollywood-friendly projects than anything else on here. One is highly entertaining and underappreciated, which I will mention later, and the other, which is The Game, is significantly messier. It has the twists and turns of a Hitchcock film, but in my opinion, lacks the cohesion and thematic depth to make those turbulent story beats come together. That's especially the case with its ending, which cheapened what the movie seemed to have been going for. My thoughts on that seem to differ from the majority though, so please feel free to disagree. Despite all of that, I thought The Game was still enjoyable while it lasted, and even though I'm doubtful of how much it will hold up for me on future viewings, it's one that I wouldn't mind watching again at some point. Number 7. Panic Room. This is the other film I would consider to be Fincher's director-for-hire project. Even though it might be less audacious story-wise than The Game was, I think that Fincher did a great job elevating what could have been a much weaker home invasion thriller if handled by a less meticulous filmmaker. And that's one of the things I appreciate most about Fincher and his body of work. He takes material that others might underestimate, and then through the use of a talented ensemble of actors, meticulous attention to detail, and precise editing, and creates something like Panic Room, which may not be a completely unique story, but is undeniably fun to watch. The tension you would hope to find in a thriller evocative of Hitchcock is undoubtedly there, which is helped by a story that keeps finding legitimate reasons to ramp up the tension with each passing scene, and the performances from Jodie Foster, Forrest Whitaker, Jared Leto, and a very young but impressive Kristen Stewart raise the stakes considerably higher. This film gets an unnecessarily bad rep for simply being one of Fincher's less creative movies, but I wish that wasn't the case, because its qualities far outweigh its lack of originality. Number 6. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. You could actually lump in this English language adaptation of the eponymous Swedish novel as another director-for-hire job, but then again, I personally wouldn't because it looks and feels exactly like the type of film that David Fincher would make. From here on out, I absolutely love each of the films I will talk about, and what I found particularly striking about The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is that it completely earns the deliberately grimy atmosphere it conjures up from the deepest recesses of pulpy storytelling. A big reason for this is that the washed out but immaculate cinematography, along with the way Fincher uses the absence of light, make this dreary murder mystery more than just that. Rather, an examination into selfish, morally obtuse individuals stuck in a world that is even more messed up than they are. It works equally as a typical detective story and a cynical look into humanity which I couldn't take my eyes off of, despite it running for over 2.5 hours. Even though I have minor issues with the screenplay, I was mesmerized by this bleak, repulsive, yet captivating thriller. Number 5. Fight Club. So I'm about to break the first 2 rules of Fight Club, but you know what? I don't care. I love this movie. It may be the stereotypical epitome of what every frat boy film bro worships in their dorm room, but hey, there are legitimate reasons for it. The quality of the filmmaking here is absolutely off the charts, and both Edward Norton and Brad Pitt gave career best performances with the roles they were given, particularly Norton since his voiceover narration is one of my favorites in all of cinema, second only to maybe the narration in A Christmas Story? I don't know. Fight Club isn't just wildly entertaining in its own sadistic kind of way though. The film also has, as many others have noted, a heap of keen observations about masculinity and capitalism, the likes of which can be interpreted in a multitude of ways, but in the sense that everyone can watch it and still gain something genuinely philosophical, even if their own views don't align with those of the characters. It's so much more than a story about 2 guys that start an underground fight club. There are a whole ton of societal implications from what the characters say and do than most movies ever manage, and yet the commentary doesn't keep it from being a great time. Fight Club is one of the most debated and celebrated films of all time, and is worthy of such praise. Number 4. Gone Girl. So what if a soap opera was high art? Well, the answer to that question would be Gone Girl, because with all of the zany twists and turns it throws at its audience, on top of its story being the stuff of petty first world problems, it shouldn't work as well as it does. But even so, I unequivocally adore this depraved thriller. Like Panic Room, this movie is another batch of evidence from Fincher that material handled by a less capable filmmaker would have resulted in straight up garbage. The level of sheer skill and craftsmanship on display with all facets of filmmaking lifted this production up to be a deeply cinematic experience that, despite being about 2.5 hours long, consistently kept me engaged both times I've watched it, even if the final minutes of the movie slowly crawl to its inevitable resolution. What's most impressive to me about Gone Girl, though, is that it defies the very notion that your central characters need to be likable to be compelling. Nick and Amy Dunn, portrayed wonderfully by Ben Affleck and a very much snubbed Rosamund Pike, are despicable human beings, but you can't help but want to know what happens to them. It's partially due to the fact that the story is just insane, but more so because the film has this strange two-sided effect where it's critiquing how people can quickly pass judgment on others by the perspectives they get from the media, while at the same time the film successfully exploits that side of human nature that just begs to get that next scoop of tantalizing gossip. This is what it's like for its entire runtime, and is why it beats the odds in carving out a fascinating story. Number 3. Zodiac. So far there seems to be a running theme going on here, which is that David Fincher likes to make 2.5-hour movies about things that shouldn't be as engaging as they are. I mean, not that making a movie about the investigation of a real-life serial killer isn't interesting, but you can't always hold one's attention for 150 plus minutes at a time. Zodiac, however, is not like most true crime stories. Sure, it has the fact-based story elements, very dark tone, and plot beats you'd come to expect, but it's really the context of the movie that makes it such a great watch. The Zodiac killer, who terrorized the Bay Area in the late 60s with several confirmed murders, was never caught. Over 50 years later, it is still an open case in the files of the San Francisco Police Department. What Fincher's film does to explore this isn't exclusively examining the circumstances by which the Zodiac killer evaded capture. Rather, its time is spent primarily on 3 individuals whose lives were either drastically affected or even ruined by the case. Seeing how all of this plays out with the film's hauntingly but expertly constructed recreations of the infamous murders, the ensuing investigation, and how it all comes together with the filmmaking and performances is truly a magnificent sight to see. It takes what otherwise could have been a standard procedural and morphs it into something much more human and personal, which is what I strongly value in the entertainment I consume. You might not think there is much value in seeing such a long story about an unsolved series of murders play out, but you'd be surprised. Number 2. The Social Network. For the longest time, I was among the crowd who thought, gee, how could a movie about the creation of Facebook really be that interesting? And then once I finally watched it for the first time in 2017, I thought, oh, I guess it can be that interesting. The Social Network may technically be about Mark Zuckerberg and the creation of Facebook, but really, its focus is never on the history of the now toxic social media platform. Rather, the messy, complicated narrative of how it came to be is merely a backdrop for a Shakespearean-level drama. With dialogue delivered handsomely by Aaron Sorkin, electrifying performances from absolutely everyone involved, Andrew Garfield being the standout.
Sorry! My Prada's at the cleaners! Along with my hoodie and my you flip-flops, you pretentious douchebag!
And David Fincher once again delivering his A-game in the director's chair. This film is a masterclass in making a subject one normally wouldn't care about and transforming it into something you can't take your eyes off of. Not a single second of screen time is wasted here, and everything weaves together seamlessly into a tragic chronicle of friendship, betrayal, and greed. Themes that are timeless regardless of the time period the story is set in. And that's why this film will likely live on as one of the most beloved and respected films of the past decade, because even though it works from the lens of learning about our recent history, it is just a solid, compelling story that everyday people can relate to. It's certainly grown to be one of my personal favorites of the 2010s over these past few years, and I will likely talk about it in greater detail on this channel in the future. However, it still has nothing on what I think is the best film David Fincher has made, which is Seven. Yes, this is another predictable film bro answer, but I have good reason for it. At least I think so. For one thing, both my wife and I love detective stories, especially murder mysteries. Something about them just taps into this twisted part of me that wants to know about the who did what happened to who, and the why when it comes to horrible things like homicide. Seven certainly does this through its depiction of a partnership of homicide detectives investigating what ends up being a series of grisly murders based on the 7 deadly sins. But as is typical with David Fincher's body of work, there is always more going on with his stories than the plot lets on. What makes Seven more compelling to me than any of Fincher's other films, aside from the fact that it's pretty much perfect filmmaking, is how it taps into the conflict between good and evil. I won't go into this in great depth because Filmento already did this in a much better way than I ever could with this video that's linked in the description, but this film shows the struggle that everyday people have in a society that has succumbed to the temptation of apathy in a cruel world. You really feel the dreariness, dejection, and disgust among every single person that lives in the film's deliberately unnamed city, for rather than being a place that people can call home, it's an undesirable setting where crime has become so normalized that hearing about the latest murder has about the same nullifying effect as scrolling through one's newsfeed on Twitter. That's why John Doe's string of horrendous killings is so impactful, because not only are they repugnant to the point of being unforgettable, he kills these people in the way he does to prove some sick point about the world, the likes of which is executed brilliantly by this film's all-timer ending. I watched this film twice in 2020, and for all these reasons and more, both times I felt completely overwhelmed by the story presented to me. This will surely go down as one of the best movies I have ever seen, and just like The Social Network, is one that I look forward to watching and analyzing more over the years. Well, that's it, guys. This is the last video I will be making that consists of a review for a movie released in 2020, so you should expect my annual top 10 list to be released sometime in February or March. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. Either way, if you don't want to miss out on those videos when they come out, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and consider joining the notification squadron as well. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a good one.